Loretta Mester is with me. Served as president of the Cleveland Fed Reserve from 2014 to 2024. Madam President, forgive me, you probably didn't hear, I don't know how much of what has just taken place you heard, but basically they came out, President Trump said that the cost of the building had gone up from 2 points down to 3.5. The chairman of the Fed said, no, you're wrong. They have a public disagreement over the cost. And then President Trump says, I want you to lower interest rates. And I've never seen Jerome Powell look so unhappy as he was in that picture. What do you make of today's shenanigans, Loretta?
Well, it's a continuing campaign from the administration to try to influence monetary policy. And it's very unfortunate because it undermines the credibility of the institution. I also don't think it really is going to meet the president's goals, which he states are pro-growth policies and wanting to have long-term interest rates come down. If the Fed were to succumb to the pressure that President Trump is putting on them, they would lose all credibility. And I think you'd actually see, if they were going to cut as much as President Trump would like them to, all the way back to 1%, you'd see long-term bond yields actually go up. Right. Because the market participants would then demand, higher coverage because inflation would be higher. They would be, have a risk premium there to hold government debt. So this is not something that really conforms with what the president's own policy agenda is.
Right. So let's split this into two areas. Firstly, let's do the, if you will, the theatre of what we've seen today, and then we'll talk about actually interest rates and whether they justifiably should be cut. On the question, you know Jerome Powell well. He's not the sort of man who is going to, well, he's made it clear he's not going to give in. But we had Mohamed El-Arian earlier this week saying for the good of the Fed, he should step down. We were all shocked when Mohamed said that. How will Powell be taking all of this?
Well, Powell cares about the institution of the Fed. And he also is going to do what the Fed always does when setting monetary policy, which is really focus on the dual mandate goals, which for the Fed is price stability is one. And the second goal is maximum employment, which Congress has set for the Fed. And use the best analysis he can and the data and listen to people around the table, their views, and set monetary policy based on that. But this is not helpful because it means that the Fed is going to have to spend more time telling people what are the real things driving monetary policy and making sure they understand that it isn't, the president trying to influence it that actually has any effect. So it complicates the whole process, which is not good. And Jerome Powell will feel that deeply. He will feel that really his job is to set policy as the Fed always has done based on the economics of it. But this is not helpful. And I do not think that his resigning is going to be helpful either. He needs to stay there and do his job and focus in on what the actual things that are driving monetary policy, the economy, where it's going, inflation, what's happening in labor markets, and try to filter all this out. But it's very difficult to do that, but he will be able to do that.
Do you believe that, I guess it's sort of a moot question, this, because the pressure is being put to bear. But I mean, I guess what I would say is if the pressure wasn't being put to bear, therefore you don't want to be seen to give in, is there a strong case to be cutting rates further and faster now, bearing in mind the tariff bump that is still got to feed through the system? Should the Fed cut?
So there is a case being made for getting back to a downward path on policy, which they started last September before the tariffs. July isn't the time to do it. You've got a lot more data coming out. You have 2 more employment reports and you have 2 more inflation reports coming before the September meeting. But at that September meeting, I think they're going to have a meaty discussion about where policy should be. Of course, it'll depend on what happens between now and that meeting in terms of the economic developments. But I do think that they'll be able to have a discussion about where policy should be going. July is not the time because there hasn't been enough data and change. September, there'll be more information that they can use. And really, it's all about balancing the risks of both parts of your mandate. You know, there is a case to be said that tariffs will likely raise the price level, but may not have persistent inflation. But we don't know that yet. So it's going to be balancing that risk versus what's happening in the labor market. Right now, the labor market's really healthy and inflation is still above goal. So I think they're right to stand pat in July and then wait for more information and see where they are in September.
So this evening, when your day is over and you sit down with a drink of your choice, and you start to review the way, and you look at the pictures of today and Powell and Trump, and knowing, you know, your own love of the institution, of the federal system, the Federal Reserve System, which is such a cornerstone, what will you make of today?
Well, it's unprecedented. You know, I think it's right for the Fed, who has been given this great responsibility and has been able to run an independent monetary policy, to be held accountable for its policy decision and also the other workings of the Fed. That said, today was not that. Today was another step in the continuing haranguing of the president to try to get the Fed to set policy according to his preferences. And that's not what the Fed should be doing. So this was unfortunate. You know, it was important that the chair be there, but again, don't misinterpret this as somehow accountability. This is not that.
I'm grateful, as always. Enjoy the drink when you finally get to it. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on Crestmead's Business. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now,